Good afternoon. I think we are ready to get started. We've got a great group here today. And I am going to be your host and just give you a little information about our next 45 minutes. I'm Elizabeth Foster. I'm the Director of Philanthropy here in South Carolina for the Nature Conservancy of South Carolina. And I'm really happy to see all of you today. And we're very excited to be partnering with our colleague Colette DeGarity, and she is a wonderful native plant expert, and I think you're all in for a treat today. I know if you're like me, you'd rather be out in nature or in Colette's yard doing this in person, but for now, I think this is a great and safe way to connect and to learn. So let me just give you a quick overview of the program. It's going to run about 25 minutes, Colette's part, and then we'll have time for questions. So to submit a question at any point during the presentation, just go to the bottom of your screen, click on the chat button, and type in your question. You can do that at any point. We also recommend that you click on speaker view, and that's at the top right corner of your screen, and that will just keep the one person who's speaking in your view and fewer distractions. We'll also keep everyone on mute to avoid any background noise. But again, if you have questions, just type them in. So we're going to also have a couple of questions or polls pop up during the program to help us get to know you better and get to know your interests. So participate if you'd like. It's not required, but we'd love to hear from you. So we'll start with our first poll, and we're just going to get an idea of where everyone's calling in from. We're going to take about 20 or 30 seconds for this. Great. Okay. Thank you all for participating. It looks like we have a majority from the Low Country, but a good mix from throughout the state, and a lot of you who already have native plants in your yard. So that's great. I think you're going to learn more about that today. Just a quick overview of the Nature Conservancy of South Carolina. We have been working from the mountains to the sea for over 50 years. Our priorities today are focused on protecting land and water, restoring forests, securing fresh water, and really a big focus on climate resilience and adaptation. And also, many of you may not know, the Nature Conservancy works in over 70 countries and is working every day for the planet to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. And without the support of friends like you, this work could not be possible here in South Carolina and all over the planet. So thank you all. So we'll move on to the program, and I'm very excited to introduce my colleague Colette DeGarity. Colette oversees the Nature Conservancy's Regional Longleaf Pine Conservation Program. And in this area, she provides leadership for the work happening from Virginia to Texas. She has 20 years of experience in conservation planning, and previously to this role, she worked with us in the South Carolina chapter, managing preserves, restoring natural habitat, and educating about invasive plant species, and educating a lot of us too about getting native plants in our yard. And I've learned so much from Colette over the years. She makes it so easy and unintimidating for those of us who are not botanists but love to have native plants in our yard. So Colette is gonna get started in just a second. We are fortunate that she did a few videos in her own yard, so she could give us some firsthand examples. Colette and her husband and their twin 10-year-olds love to spend time out in nature, and you're also going to have a real treat meeting their 30-year-old tortoise named Mo. So Colette, thanks for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I can speak for a long time. So sit back for 3 hours here, and we'll get going. Just kidding. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can and focused. And I want to just first start by giving you my perspective on this native plant talk. I have an ecology background. I'm shown in this photo here in a really pristine longleaf pine habitat. And that's the lens that I see bringing natives into our backyard. To me, the aesthetic of a really beautiful natural community is what I love, and bringing natives in the yard reminds me of being in these places. So I don't have a horticultural background or a landscape architect background, anything like that. As I move through this, I'm going to be speaking from my position as an ecologist. And as I used to help South Carolina manage our nature preserves, I often saw invasive plants in the landscape. So I really thought a lot about over the years the connection of how we plant in our yard that moves into our natural forests. And oftentimes we can make the difference by either planting those plants that are going to support wildlife and pollinators and all of that, or if we plant invasive plants, there's an opportunity there for birds to take those seeds and carry them into our native forest. So that has helped propel me into educating people about native plants more so we can help contribute to the good things that get planted in the landscapes and try to reduce those invasives that can get into our native ecosystems. And I'll keep talking about that a little bit more. So first, I want to make sure that we talk about there we go, what a native plant is and make sure everybody's on the same page with that. So native plants are those that were here pre-settlement before we really, our populations grew and we really started changing the landscape. They take thousands of years to co-evolve and create these natural habitats, natural community types, plant community types, like a longleaf pine forest or like a bottomland hardwood system or an oak hickory forest. And those habitats create the ideal conditions for our native wildlife to thrive. So when we're talking about a native plant, those are plants that evolved in those community types for a long time and have a purpose in supporting our ecosystems and our wildlife. I want to just touch on naturalized plants quickly. So a naturalized plant is a plant that's not from here, but has, took hold and the conditions were right. And over, the past 100 years, perhaps, or 50 years, it has taken hold in an area. Something like white clover that came from Europe previously. Now we see that in, our yards or ditches or whatever have you. And that's something that we would consider a naturalized plant. It doesn't serve a purpose in a natural community type that has evolved over thousands of years, like others that we're going to talk about. So why would you plant natives in your yard? For many of us, the first reason is they are going to be so much easier to care for. They can use a lot less water because they're used to our environmental conditions. So here in the South, we've got these hot and humid conditions. We've got particular insects that native plants are used to, and they're not going to be harmed as much as if you're planting something that's exotic. The first and foremost, they're going to be easier to care for because they are used to our soils and our weather conditions and things like that. Also, here in South Carolina in particular, we think of them as a cultural symbol in many aspects. The live oak shown here, the palmetto, cabbage palmetto that's shown on our flag, the sweetgrass down in the bottom right. That picture I took at the Riverbank Zoo last November. And so we're getting ready for a really good sweetgrass time right now, great fall plant. And then like this spigelia or Indian pink shown in the bottom left here, there's so many native plants obviously that are beneficial for our wildlife and our larger ecosystems like I mentioned. And this plant shown here has these great tubular flowers that hummingbirds love, one of my favorites. So to touch on that a little bit more and talking about important native plants for pollinators, here's a handful here that I do have in my yard. You can't go wrong with asters, coneflowers, goldenrods, sunflowers, and then this top right is the blanket flower that's shown, and it's found mostly in coastal habitat or beach habitats. The top left is one of our many native milkweeds that you can find all across the state. This is a swamp milkweed that had a short bloom time, was really gorgeous. And the coneflower there, the purple coneflower, the second photo, that's more of an upstate plant. But it does really well in native gardens across the state. So just to give you a little touch of those, which a lot of us know, these really great showy flowers are really great for pollinators, right? They attract the pollinators. There's that relationship with visual effect. And so that's pleasing both to us aesthetically in our gardens, and that has that double benefit for wildlife. And to go a little further into that, I just wanted to show you some black swallowtail caterpillars that that I find every year because we plant this native plant, Golden Alexander. You can see on the left, the caterpillars themselves. It's a great teaching moment for my kids when I can ask them to go out and count the caterpillars each year. And I wanted to show, so the bottom right shows this particular plant in bloom has really nice yellow flowers. Again, this is an upstate plant in nature. It's rare in the coastal plain, but it does well all across the state in native gardens. And that middle right picture shows, this was just taken a week or so ago. It shows, you know, the caterpillars ate the plant, but then right from the center, it's coming right back. And I'm all about letting a little bit for them and a little bit for us. And I took this picture in my yard, actually this week as well, of a Monarda punctata, or a horse mint. Really beautiful right now. This is a great fall plant. It is a huge attractant to our bees, which are so important. We know we need to keep sustaining our bee populations. So this plant you will see probably seen quite a bit in the ditches and things like that along the sides of the roads. It grows very well in full sun and different community types. And in the mint family, you can always identify mints by their square stem. So this is one of my favorites as well. You see the really pretty three-tiered kind of purplish pink flower. So let's talk a little bit more about yard layouts, and so I'll kind of move more into different aspects of my yard in particular. And you can see my yard is, my house is typical suburbia. So when I'm talking about putting native plants, I mean, this is a corner lot in Mount Pleasant here on the coast. And you can see we've been continuing to plant different flower beds and reduce our lawn. I'm really hoping to change the aesthetic of people's mindsets when they're thinking about knit gardens. This on the end, I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about, is a rain garden on the end by this oak tree. I'm going to show you some different pictures of around the year of when some things are in bloom there. One thing I'll just mention too is we get asked all the time, my husband and I, why does your yard look so good and so lush? And in this picture, it may not do it quite justice, but then I launch typically into my spiel with my neighbors about, oh, you know, if you plant native plants, then it really helps the symbiotic relationship with the roots and the insects. And they're, you know, often looking at me like I'm a little crazy because they're thinking I'm going to tell them something about some chemical or fertilizer that I put on the grass. And I, hands down, firmly believe that, and I know that native plants are really beneficial for our soil. So this is a good example here. This is a mid-Atlantic plant example, but does justice to our southern natives as well. You can see the root system of native plants really go deep. And there's a symbiotic relationship with insects, native plants, soil. Those plants are attracting the insects that help to build and develop soil. You're stabilizing your soil with our natives versus other annuals that you might plant. So just good to keep in mind too about that richness that you're going to find later down the road after planting natives with your soil. So to switch gears a little bit and build on that a little bit more, I want to talk about rain gardens as well. And I showed you, you saw right on the corner of our lot where we've installed a rain garden. This is something that a lot of different agencies are promoting for a variety of reasons having to help with stormwater runoff. And this diagram shows a good example of how, you know, when it rains, everything washes off your yard, goes into the gutter. And this day and age, flooding is unfortunately all too common. So this is also a way to help mitigate flooding in a small way within your yard, but if more people are doing this type of these rain gardens, you can also help flooding in a bigger way. And the Nature Conservancy is actually working on a strategy around rain gardens with the town of Andrews right now, and helping to mitigate some of their flood and do some education up there. So I'll talk about how we installed a rain garden and kind of show you how we moved through that. We bought our house about 10 years ago. I think we installed this maybe 12 12 years ago or so, 12, 13 years ago. And so on the corner of, we just had grass everywhere in our lawn, and we continue, or our yard, and we continued to build beds. What you do is you put some looser soil, and I think you can see in the second photo here, some loose soil that's underneath some of the mulch that we put in, and we planted some plants here. So you dig down, you put looser soil that you might have, because you want that rain to soak in to the plants that are there. So a year later, you can see what, after one growing season, the plant's coming back and doing well in the corner of the lot there. We planted good things that like loose, well-drained soil, like blanket flower that's found on the coast. This is bone set here, which you can find further into the state in a variety of areas. A lot of great different plants, and I experiment by putting different things in there all the time. This is that last picture. This was another year's growing season, and one of my favorite plants, Blazing Star, I put a lot of those in there, and you can see that really pops. So this is a fall picture. Those blanket flower will grow almost till frost, and you kind of can keep trimming up the dead stuff. And you can see the oaks getting bigger here. And so again, I really like to put different things in there. And more recently, you can see some of the flowers in there, including goldenrods. Bring those really good yellow in combination with some sunflowers. Got some coreopsis. This picture was taken around spring. We've got our blue-eyed grasses popping, beautiful swamp sunflower, milkweed. And then something that's starting to get a little bit of fall color right now is Itea virginica, or Virginia sweet spire. So that's something that it's a small bush that gets a white flower in the spring and gets fall color about now. I really like to mix and match things in my yard that bloom at different times and show different color at different times. And there's so many natives that you can intersperse with other perennials that you might already plant that are serving those purposes for your aesthetic. So to move to a different spot in the yard, up close to the house when we first moved in here, there was all these hawthorn bushes, and that's really typical. Folks want to frame out their house with those hawthorn bushes just to have clean lines of set. But we took all of that out, and there was a bunch of invasive Japanese honeysuckle intertwined with all of that. And we planted some things like native grasses. It's a sweet grass. Again, that blanket flower does so well in our yard. And this is that golden Alexander in bloom. And we have rattlesnake master, these other bushes, perennials here. And these are the blooms on those, kind of gives it that funky look, and you've got different heights, different textures there. I really like that. And to give you a quick sense with a video here of what it looks like now. So the golden Alexander's not blooming, the sweetgrass is getting ready to bloom, and our blanket flowers are petering out a little bit. But then we round the corner to a really large beautyberry bush that replaced a Chinese privet that we had in that spot when we first moved into the house. Now, beautyberry is a really great native plant that a lot of folks are using in landscapes these days. You can prune them back, and they'll pop right back. You can shape them how you want. And in this early summer, late spring, there are these really delicate pink flowers that come out. And then in the fall, this is a great fall plant, you can see all these berries that pop out. We tend to get birds like cardinals and tufted titmice that are eating the berries, but a variety of birds will really come, and probably by mid-November, most of these berries are going to be gone. And I like to see the evolution into fall of these berries just start to get more and more purple. This picture is taken from last fall in October. I'm just missing a few weeks shy of all the color kind of popping out in my yard for the fall. And these days, the way we've been quarantining and really focusing in our yards, a lot of folks are wanting to bring edible plants into their yards and their gardens. And so I wanted to make sure I touched on some native edible plants that I have in my yard and you can find in nurseries. Georgia savory here on the left is one of the few native herbs that you might recognize if you ever see in your spice cabinet savory. I believe that's made from this variety, if not another variety. And this it almost looks like a rosemary bush and has really great little purple flowers that bees love. It's a really nice attractant. Passion vine, of course, is gorgeous, and you can make jelly from the fruit. You may have heard of passion fruit jelly. And then pawpaws are something I'm just now starting to plant. They've got this great red flower, and it's a small tree, and the fruit is something in between like a mango and a banana. I actually had a college professor that told me that if or told anyone in the class, if you can bring me a pawpaw fruit from the wild, then you can get an automatic A, because the fruit are so sweet and juicy, and it's coveted by wildlife. So it's rare that you would ever be walking through the woods and find the fruit on a pawpaw. You'll find pawpaw out in nature, but to find the fruit is a special thing. So, of course, blueberries are a really great edible bush to have in your yard as well. There's a variety of native blueberries to South Carolina. The top two, Quorumbosum and Eliottii, we sell at the native plant sales that we put on here in Charleston for the Native Plant Society. And then we also do carry the Vaccinium ashii, which is a cultivated variety, but you know, it looks very much similar to other native blueberries, and it provides such a nice berry. It's very popular. So I have a mixture of all three that I put on this side of my yard, and have a good crop now after they've been well established for more than 6 years, 6 to 10 years in our yard. I also want to talk about small trees and shrubs, and give you some tips on ones that really blend in well and aren't too large in some of the spaces that you might want to put them. Red buckeye is a great small tree that attracts hummingbirds and other pollinators with those tubular type flowers that bloom in the spring. And our fringe tree, top right, has these really beautiful, delicate white flowers in the spring. Below are two different pictures of Hartsebuston, or strawberry bush is another common name for it. The one on the bottom left I took while I was hiking in Blue Wall Preserve several years ago. It's a TNC preserve up in northern Greenville County. And then the bottom right is the same bush in my yard, and it does really, really well in a sunny spot. And it has really unique seed pods that burst open like that right now, this time of year, to kind of give it some kind of a neat pop. And it does get some fall color with those leaves as well. And again, this is just a reminder for me, of being able to see those things in the wild and on hikes, and then also be able to put them in my yard is something I really enjoy. And I wanted to touch real briefly on large trees. Well, I'm not going to go into detail about really important wildlife into your yard. I'm sure many folks want to have large shade trees already, but oak trees are really one of the best sources of caterpillars, and caterpillars are necessary for bird species. So this whole chain and cycle that is really necessary if you're going to be bringing and wanting to bring different types of wildlife into your yard. And the lot that we bought it because it had a lot of old oaks, magnolias, and hickories in particular, and had in the backyard, it really helped round out our lot. So, but I also could not speak about oak leaf hydrangea. It's a really great shrub that most nurseries are carrying these days because it's so beautiful. In the wild, you won't see it be quite this robust. It's funny, it does really well in our yard landscapes. And it also is one that has really great fall color as well. So once you get it established, you're going to see a lot of these leaves turn reddish and orangish. And it's one of my favorites for dried flower arrangements too. I cut those flowers on the right there about 3 or 4 months ago, and they're doing really well. And they last a really long time. So I also wanted to make sure to put a slide in here about deer resistant or preferred native plants, because as we are getting, the urban interface is very real with a lot of our wildlands. And folks ask me about this all the time, about hey, what can I plant that deer won't eat, and what do they, tend to always prefer. And here's a list here of plants that are, of which deer are more resistant to and what they prefer. But I will say that anything new and kind of succulent and small, they're going to be attracted to, or they're likely going to eat. So you'd have to fence it if you have a real problem with deer. But then other folks may really want to bring deer more into their yards, and so that gives you that sense. And I believe this presentation will be sent around to everybody afterwards. It's registered, so if you want to, you don't have to take notes if you are. But I wanted to go back to that concept of when you're out in nature, thinking about your yard and what you can find, and some of our really wonderful preserves across the state. Santee Coastal Washoe Reserve in northern Charleston County is one of my favorites. It's got a really incredible longleaf pine, old growth, and the understory there is maintained by fire. That it's got a really good representation of natives. And fall is a great time to go there. You see that blazing star, that purple blazing star is coming out. You'll see the horse mints and all the ferns, and even some of the ferns will start to change colors. That's our fall color in the south compared to up in the upstate. And there's a really wonderful boardwalk to see some of our bottleneck hardwoods out there, and cypress swamp out there as well. In the middle of the state, Peachtree Rock is definitely a favorite, and November or early December are, to me, the best times to go. You can see that picture on the bottom there with the fall colors. That is a late November picture right there. And a couple of the rare plants you can see there, woody goldenrod on the bottom right, and sandhill rosemary, which is a unique species, really likes that well-drained soil. But there's plant community types there at Peachtree Rock that are representative of the coastal plain and representative of the upstate. So it's a really cool niche right there in the central part of the states, west of Columbia. And then also wanted to touch on Nine Times Preserve up in Pickens County in the upstate, where to me, the best time to visit here is spring, to see these spring ephemerals. But again, you're going to see some really cool fall colors getting ready to pop out in the fall right now. But I love the May apples there that blanket the understory. I keep wanting to get May apples in my yard as a ground cover. And I've got really just one sad, lonely May apple right now that keeps coming up every year, but I haven't quite figured out the formula to replicate that. And of course, there's some great trout lilies and trilliums and bloodroot and all kinds of great stuff that pops up in the spring. But really great trails and prairie warblers and other birds using it year-round in full force. It's a great birding spot. So with all this information, I want to make sure you know where you can find native plants here in South Carolina, and then potentially, what to do if you're outside of South Carolina. Right now, the South Carolina Native Plant Society has a fall sale going on. I've been on the board of the Native Plant Society for a long time, and I helped start the native plant sales there back in 2007 as a way to help educate people about native plants and really get them in the yards, frankly. So that people can have that carryover space for nature. So October 17th at Charlestown Landing in Charleston we're having a native plant market, sort of like a farmer's market, where there'll be 4 to 6 native plant vendors, and you just shop as you would at a farmer's market. And then in the upstate, they're doing an online ordering process, and so you can order them online, and I believe the last I saw, they will let you know where you'll be picking up those plants, somewhere between Spartanburg and Greenville. But all of that information and a lot of native plant lists and resources are on the South Carolina Native Plant Society website, which is shown here. The other thing too is when you're going into your favorite nursery, either a small local nursery you go to, or even Lowe's or Home Depot, make sure you always ask, can you show me where some native plants are? And they may look at you like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but that's okay, because you will be helping to create the demand that we want to see. We want to continue to see that demand so that suppliers will help meet that demand with additional supply. So I always tell people to ask about natives. It'll start to, it's a trend already, but we want to make sure we keep that going forward. And I always like to make sure people know that they can Google the South Carolina Exotic Pest Plant Council or go to this website. And there are lists there of the latest exotic plants, invasive plants, I should say, to watch out for. Invasive plants are the ones that do harm and, you know, move into a space to and displace native plants. Exotic plants are just not native, and so that could be, you know, your garden plants or some of the, you know, petunias or other things you want to plant and pull out. But invasive plants are those that do harm, and those are ones we want to try to avoid planting. A couple of great resources too to keep in mind. The wildflowers of South Carolina, to me, that is the Bible. I love how Dr. Porcher and Dr. Rayner set the tone in that book where they have the native plants and they show the community types that they're a part of. So you can really get the full breadth of information. They've got a lot of great definitions, learn a lot about the state of native plants, more than 4,000 in South Carolina. So they talk a lot about all of that. And then as a gardener, the Native Alternatives to Invasives is a great book that you can open it, look at plants that are typical of our yards, like Mandina or something like that. And then they give options of native plants that fill that niche of that particular plant you might want to replace. It, you know, the height, the color, that kind of thing. So that's a really handy one. It's got a lot of pictures. Both of these you can find at your libraries as well. And I just have to touch on Doug Tallamy, who's a great inspiration to me. He's an entomologist. He's been bringing to light a lot of this issue for a long time now, and he wrote this great book in 2009, Bringing Nature Home, that helped tell the whole story from the entomologist perspective and how insects are so important in building soils, and native plants help do all of that. And he just wrote this new book that I have not read yet, but I love the title and I do intend to get it. And he helped the National Wildlife Federation develop this native plant finder. So wherever you are in the country, North America, you can plug in your zip code and they help provide lists and talk about the pollinators that are associated with those native plant lists that they provide. So I just wanted to mention that as well. And lastly, I just thought I'd leave you with a little source of native wildlife in my own backyard.
Mo, this is our live-in tortoise who enjoys all of our native plants and tends to hide herself amongst them. She is actually a South American tortoise, but she is the cousin of our local South Carolina, Georgia tortoise, the gopher tortoise. Same genus, and so I like to think of her sometimes as our native tortoise resident. She loves people and, of course, being buried under native plants. She's about 30.
Good old Mo. So I'd be happy to answer questions. I think we're first going to take one more poll question, and then we can do some discussion. Okay, so yeah, pollinators, yeah, it's good, and birds, hand in hand. A lot of us aren't trying to bring big mammals in. Some people, I think, are trying to bring in herpetofauna. I do like to see it myself. I know others are trying to avoid it, and snakes and such, but I do love to see tree frogs that come into my own yard. So I think someone's going to facilitate questions. Is that right?
Yep. We're going to move on to questions. Thank you for your inspiration, Colette. I always love hearing about how easy this can be and just how good it is for nature and the environment in our own backyard. So I think we're all taking a lot of notes. So now we have a few questions that have been typed into the chat. If you have others, please type them in. And if we don't get to them all today, it looks like we have a lot of them, just email us with your question and we'll be glad to email back to you with an answer. So I'm going to start off with one that was emailed in advance, Colette. And this person asked, which native plants, what's the best time of year to plant native plants, or is there a good time?
Yeah, we often talk about planting in the fall and winter, particularly in the low country of South Carolina, because then your plants have a chance to overwinter, get those roots established before that really hot and humid time, and you don't have to worry about watering them as much. And when I talk to folks at our plant sales, I usually tell them, water them really good when you plant them, and then just maybe water them once or twice and a few days spread. But you really should not have to water native plants a whole lot either once you get them established, except if you're planting them in the summer. Summer's a good time to avoid. You can plant natives year round, but summertime, you just have to pay a lot more attention to them.
Great. Okay, another question. Which salvia species are considered native to the Midlands of South Carolina?
Midlands. Well, there's Salvia coccinea, and that one I'm trying to remember the common name. It's a red flowers. I believe it's native that far up. I'd have to look at a range-wide map, but that would be a good start. And actually, I have my Guide to Wildflower book right here. This is, again, a great one to peek at. It's not going to have every single plant in it. There's also a really good website that is hosted by the Natural Resource Conservation Service that you can search the scientific name of a plant, and it will tell you where it's native to. So this is Salvia lyrata urticulofolia. It has a few of them in here. It doesn't have the Salvia coccinea, so that may not be the best succinct answer, but there's a lot of good guides that you can go to double check that.
Great. Here's a question about a rain garden. This person says they have a corner of their yard that sprinklers don't reach but has a gutter and downspout. Would a rain garden work in that scenario?
Yes, and there was another part of my yard that I did not show that I actually do have a bit of a rain garden where my air conditioning hose comes out and where we have a gutter downspout. And I plant actually more wet species there. I have the marsh, some of the marsh plants there, the hibiscus, the swamp hibiscus there. I also have some iris there. And so that's another way to take advantage of water that's already coming off of your house, and to be able to plant it up close or on a corner, just like you said. I know also we did a rain garden like that with the help of Clemson Extension at the Charlestown land property on the corner of one of their historic houses. And the same concept, use that downspout and made sure you put plants there that could handle like water when you had big rains.
Great. Here's a good question. Are there native invasives?
So that's a good question, because there are a handful of plants that we don't call them invasive because we tie the term to invasive as those that displace natives. I guess we would say some folks do call plants that are prolific. That's invasive in my yard. A couple that come to mind, there's a couple of vines, like a trumpet vine that sometimes takes over that people don't want. I actually have it on my pergola and it does really well there. So it's finding the right place. That swamp sunflower, Helianthus angustifolia, the way that it spreads underneath, it will take over a lot of what you have in your yard. So it depends on if you have a place that's bare that you want to get a plant established. That would be a good one, that bright yellow flower. And it's really pretty in the fall, but I tend to pull it out, half of it out every year, because it'll take over some of my other plants, and then I still have plenty left. So there are a handful. I guess there's so many different ones, I couldn't list them all, but those are a couple of examples of plants that you may want to consider. And when you're buying them, you can ask that question if you're concerned about taking over an area in your yard.
Great. Can you tell us some good natives to plant in containers?
Containers. Yeah, there's a lot of good ones. You can do sweetgrass in containers, like large containers, if you want to frame out something on your sidewalk or around your door frame. Sweetgrass will do the best in full sun as far as blooming, so that's something to keep in mind. Sometimes I have put a variety of ferns you can put in containers, and they'll do well in the shade. I've actually put the dune sunflower, which you can see in the background of this photo with my tortoise. It's a beach plant. It really likes well-drained soil, but the way it grows, it kind of hangs and falls open. I've actually put that in hanging baskets before. It does die back in the winter, so it's a seasonal thing, but then it'll pop back up in the early summer, late spring. And then now it'll bloom all the way until frost, which is kind of cool about a lot of natives. You know, you can, here in South Carolina, again, if you're in the low country, a lot of these flowers will last a long time. I've also put maypop, or the passion vine, in containers, but you just have to have something for it to crawl up. So if you don't know where you want to put a vine, that's a good idea. Get a big pot, put a trellis, and you can have a really gorgeous vine somewhere on your back patio. And if it gets eaten by the Gulf fritillary, which is the host, that plant is a host for the Gulf fritillary butterfly, then you just, you let it get eaten, you have a bunch of great butterflies, and then it'll come back up the next season.
Okay, next question. Are there any good native plants to put in a septic drain field?
That might be a good question for someone from NRCS or Clemson Extension. I guess I'm thinking that's sort of like something you just want some good ground cover. I would probably put native grasses. And there's a lot of really good ones. Thinking about like little blue stem and love grass and plume grass. It depends on where you are too, because if you're in a more coastal habitat, you could do something like Spartina bakeri. But yeah, I would probably ask like an NRCS or Clemson Extension about that one in particular.
Great. How do you acidify soil for your blueberries?
I actually heard and have done myself, you can put coffee grounds actually as like a mulch around the tops of your blueberries. And you can also use pine straw, because pine straw is a bit more acidic. So those are two ways that I've done it. I think if you wanted to get into soil changes, again, I would ask Clemson Extension.
And then there are a couple of questions about light and shade. Do you have any thoughts on preferences or good ones to have in one or the other?
Well, there's so many natives that do well in full sun. All your sunflowers, and a lot of all your grass, typically most of your grass species, a lot of your native vines. The shade can be more tricky, and there's something that we've sold a lot at our sales, Michella repens or partridge berry, which is a really delicate little ground cover that gets these little white flowers and little red berries. Sometimes I recommend people put that under their oaks if they don't want to just have mulch, or you have a patch that's not growing anything. Excuse me, there's sometimes some pretty hardy ferns too, that we sell a couple different varieties of native ferns at our plant sales typically. And things like, gosh, there's so many, to choose from, but when you go to a plant sale, oftentimes they'll separate shade and full sun plants. And if not, that's just a great question to ask whoever's selling the plants, because again, there's so many good ones to choose from. But the shade there's a lot more full sun plants than shade, I would say. And that Spigelia, that Indian pink that I showed in one of the early slides, that does really well in shade, alongside mayaples or ferns. That's actually what I have in my yard in a little area. And Jack in the Pulpit. I've got a little section with all of those things that you would find in undercover.
Great. All right, our next question is from Anderson County in the upstate. This person says, I have a small bog garden on my deck for ease of care. If I make a large bog at the bottom of my sloped yard, do you think I would need to add water often through the summer?
You know, I haven't done a bog garden myself. It would probably just depend on the amount of rain that you would get as to, and you know, how you would watch that, how you would watch that unfold. And you probably have more experience than me in helping to maintain a bog garden. If it's full sun, yeah, you'd have to watch it. And if we didn't have really, you know, if we had a drought period, then likely yes, but it's probably something you already know. So I wish I knew more about bog gardens. And there's a couple of Native Plant Society members that have some good ones. And there's, I think, also a good example at the Botanical Gardens at Clemson as well. That's, if you all have not walked through that garden, Patrick McMillan really designed and helped set up a really nice set of gardens there that mimic our natural communities. It's an education to walk through them, and they're beautifully done. Everything from pitcher plant bog gardens to longleaf pine savannas and everything in between. So highly recommend it.
All right, next question. This person says their lemon balm has become invasive. Do they need to pull it all out?
Well, that's up to you, I guess, and how you want to maintain your yard. I have lemon balm, but I have it in pots. So if you do find something in your yard that is really escaping and you have to tend to it every year, every season, that may be one you want to put in a pot, a large pot, just to keep it contained, versus putting it into the beds of your garden. I've never put it in the beds of my garden to kind of see how it works myself.
Okay, we'll do a couple more questions. This one person references Talamy's new book that you had just mentioned and asked if, or mentioned he recommends reducing lawns by half. And do you agree with that?
I think that would be great. And I think it's up to the person. That National Wildlife Federation link that's in here, Doug Talamy did a great presentation. He may be referring to that presentation as well, but he did a really great presentation about the size of lawns and relative to what we could potentially conserve and change to really good habitat for nature. Highly recommend Googling Doug Talamy, and you'd probably find that. It's a recent talk. I definitely agree, and my husband and I continue to talk about how we can add different plant beds and make a design and cut our lawn in half. Even further than what we have. It's been a long process to what we have right now. We've taken out a lot of invasives, like the Chinese and Japanese ligustrum, which are often a part of landscapes. Bradford pear we've taken out in the back, and you know, everything in between. So yes, I agree.
Okay, and one last question. With deer season just starting, we've had quite a few questions about plants that are resistant, particularly oak leaf hydrangea. Is that deer resistant?
I think that was on that list. Again, a small one, any small newish plants that you plant, a deer could eat. I can't remember if that was on that list or not, and I don't know off the top of my head. I got that information from the North Carolina Extension offices, and you could Google it and see if there's updated information on that. I think you might also be able to find it on the Native Plant Society website potentially. Yeah, that would probably be better to search elsewhere for more pertinent, relevant information. Others may know if they have oak leaf hydrangeas in their yard and deer are not messing with them. We don't have that problem where I live.
Great. Thank you for answering all those questions. We are going to send a follow-up email out to everyone. It's going to have some resources, lists of plants, information about the native plant sales. And if you have some specific questions that we didn't get to, please email them to us and we can get back to you on that. We're going to do one final poll in just a second, but first I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. And I hope we can count on your support of the Nature Conservancy. It's so much more, well, it's always been important, but really now more than ever, what we're doing for nature and the environment and the world. is just urgent and important, and we hope that you will support us and follow our work. Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. It'll help us with our planning of our webinar series. We appreciate your joining us. We're also going to send out a link to this if you would like to share it with friends or listen to it again. But for now, happy planning, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next webinar. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.